He was a Pharisee. Now that surprises some people. In fact, Paul doesn't ever say, I used to be a Pharisee, but I'm no longer. He basically just calls himself a Pharisee. In fact, Paul's the one Pharisee from pre-70 Judaism that we know much about at all. We don't know, a lot of the rabbis, the Pharisees appear in rabbinic documents, but those come from hundreds of years later. Paul's one person who calls himself a Pharisee and whose writings we actually possess. So Paul calls himself a Pharisee.
Paul is a messianic Christic Pharisee. That's the way he pivots from being a non-messianic to being a messianic. He never gives up being a Pharisee. He just becomes, I shouldn't say just, he becomes a messianic one, a Christic one, to the nations, as he says, to the ethne, to the nations.
We don't know about Paul's early life other than what we can infer from his writings. He's clearly a Jew. He grew up outside of Israel. He grew up, he tells us, as a Pharisee. So he accepted the Pharisaic understandings of Judaism. He had to be highly educated because he writes complicated Greek. That took years and years of education. It's a weird situation with Paul, though, because he appears to be a manual laborer. He works with his hands, and in the book of Acts, we're told that he's a leather worker, sometimes translated tent maker. Tents are made out of leather, so maybe but normally somebody with that high of an education would have something a different kind of occupation. But anyway, so in any event, he knows a lot. He's not one of the great intellectuals of his day. He's not like Seneca or somebody, but he's very, very, and he's smart, very smart.
That Paul was actually brought up at the feet of Gamaliel.
I see no particular reason to doubt that. It's supplementary to what he says in his own letters. Paul is familiar with rabbinic arguments and his understanding of the Torah. Lots of people have written about this. I think he is pretty much who he says he is, but I don't have a problem with him saying that he was brought up with Gamaliel.